Hi, on this lesson we're going to be solving equations containing rational expressions. And so basically they're going to be somewhat messy to solve. This is some information about how we're going to do this. So this first part says solving equations containing rational expressions. To solve these, we're going to clear the equation of fractions. So we do this by multiplying by the LCD, and we multiply every expression in the equation by the least common denominator. After we've cleared the fractions by multiplying by the LCD, then we'll simplify, and then we're going to either solve a linear equation, quadratic equation, or possibly higher degree. And then of course you can check your solution. Now I'm going to talk about checking your solutions before we start, because I feel like that is something that you need to be aware of, and from the beginning look at that. Now for this particular equation, there are not going to be any solutions. Let me get my wording here. There won't be any solutions that we have to exclude, because all of my denominators are already just numbers, right? There are no variables in the denominator. So on this, we just have to determine our common denominator, which in this case is 10. All right, so that means that we multiply every term in the equation times 10, or both sides of the equation times 10. And remember that we're just checking to see, okay, this denominator goes into 10 how many times? And so if you look at this, 2 goes into 10 5 times, and then we take 5 times x, so that's a 5x. And then 10 goes into 10 just one time, so 1 times 21 is 21. 5 goes into 10 2 times, so we're going to multiply 2 times negative 1x, so that's a negative 2x. So we've cleared the fractions, which was the goal. Now we can solve this equation. This is linear because my x's are only to the first power. So we're going to add 2x to both sides, and then we'll divide by 7. And we find that our solution is 3. Now you can go back and check your solutions on any of these. Sometimes it gets pretty messy when you're trying to do that, but it is possible to check them. And you're basically just checking to see, are my two sides equal? So let's check this one real quick, just so I can show you that. So I would say 3 over 2 equals 21 over 10 minus 3 over 5. So basically I'm checking to see, is 21 over 10 minus 3/5 equal to 3/2? That's what I want to know. So you can use your calculators for this. You don't have to have the common denominator necessarily. If I were going to get a common denominator, I would be multiplying these by 2 over 2. So on that I would have 21 minus 6, which is 15, so 15/10. And that is equal to 3/2. So you can see that it checks. That's what you're looking for, to see if the two sides are equivalent. Okay, let's look at this next one. So this time we are going to have something that I call an excluded value. Okay, and so an excluded value is any value of x that makes our denominator 0. So you can see in this case we do have a 3x in the denominator. And if we check that, remember way back when we were finding the domain of a rational expression or a rational function, that we had to find the values that would make our denominator 0. So in this case, x cannot be 0, because that is the one number that would make the denominator 0. Remember, you can set your denominators equal to 0 to determine this. So you could say 3x equals 0, you're solving, and you get x equals 0. That is the one value that cannot be a solution to this equation. And then for your common denominator, you take 3x times 6, and 3x and 6, I'm sorry, and that's going to be an LCD of 6x. Okay, so remember you can factor those to determine. That's 3 times x and 2 times 3. Circle one of them. Circle any factors you didn't already circle. Multiply to get your LCD, which is 6x. Okay, so I'm going to write this all out because I like you to write this in such a way that it's going to be easy to eliminate your fractions, and you're showing each one of those. And then we're going to multiply every term times 6x. And we can't leave anything out, so you can't leave the 1 out, right? You have to multiply all of them by the 6x. So you see 3x goes into 6x 2 times, so that will be 10. 1 times 6x is 6x. 6 goes into 6x 1 time, and that leaves us with an x, right? And so 7 times x would be 7x. And this is also a linear equation because my variables only have a power of 1. So we subtract 6x from both sides to solve. And our solution is 10. Now 10 is okay because it is not 0. Remember, we can't have a solution of 0 in this case. Okay, so I'm not going to check every one of these because that becomes time consuming, but when you are working on something that's worth points, it's not a bad idea to go back and check your solutions. Okay, on this one, it's pretty easy to find the LCD, and also the excluded value is again 0, x cannot equal 0, and then my LCD would be 2x. This one turns out to be fairly simple in that respect because my denominators are both 2x. So you can see that 2x goes into 2x 1 time on both of these. So we're just left with the numerators. X squared minus 14 equals -5. Now to solve this, this is quadratic. So that means that we have to get it set equal to 0. So we're going to add 5 on both sides. X squared minus 9 equals 0. And then we're going to factor to solve, right? So this is the difference of squares, which is x plus 3 times x minus 3. We set both factors equal to 0. This is the 0 product rule. And then solve for x. So x is -3 or +3. Once again, these values are good solutions because neither of them were equal to 0. All right, remember we have to leave out the 0. All right, next. This is also one of those. It's not too bad because my denominators are both x minus 1. Okay. This time, my value that has to be excluded, remember I can set my denominator equal to 0 and solve. X equals 1. So I have to say that x cannot equal 1, and my LCD will be x minus 1. All right, so if 1 happens to be a solution, then, we would say no solution. Or we would have possibly another one. Okay, so x minus 1 divides into x minus 1 one time. So we simply get x minus 7 equals 11. Solve for x. This is linear by adding 7 to both sides. So x equals 18. 18 is fine as a solution in this case. So we're finished with that one. Okay, here's the next one. So in this one, we have to start out by factoring our denominator. And so our LCD is x minus 1 times x plus 1. So we're going to we have to use both of those, right? Because that's the only factors in our denominators are x minus 1 times x plus 1. And then we are going to multiply every term by this LCD. Also, x cannot be equal to a positive or negative 1, right? Because those two values would make my denominator 0. One of my denominators, or depending on which one it was. So if it makes any of them 0, we can't have that as a solution. So I'm going to rewrite this with some extra space. I find that this is helpful when I'm trying to squeeze in what I'm multiplying by. A lot of students don't want to do this step, but you guys, I feel like it's easier to make mistakes if you don't actually write this all out. So I would advise you to do that. So I multiply by these two factors that are my least common denominator. Remember, this is to clear the fractions. So when you're on this step, you want to make sure that you don't have fractions after this. And something that sometimes happens is if you start getting mixed up about what you're supposed to be doing with this, remember that this is not adding and subtracting, this is solving equations. So sometimes students get those two concepts confused. When we're adding and subtracting, we rewrite with a common denominator, and when we're solving, we eliminate our denominators. So there is a difference there. All right, so x minus 1 goes into x minus 1 one time, and I'm just going to multiply my numerator times x plus 1. So x plus 1. This eliminates the x plus 1 term or factor, and so then I'm going to take 1 times 1 minus x. Sometimes you may need parentheses here to be careful with signs, but it's a plus right there. And then on this, the entire denominator is gone, so it's just equal to 2. Now on the left hand side, I'm going to combine like terms, so I'm going to have a 2x, 1 plus negative 1 is 0, 2x equals 2, divide by 2 to solve, and I find that my solution is x equals 1. And 1 is an excluded value, so my solution cannot be 1, and this means that I have to say, oh, wait a minute, I just realized this is one of my excluded values and it cannot be x equals 1, so I'll write that out. I don't know if our book exactly uses this terminology, but I just like to use it because we're leaving this value cannot be my solution. It's excluded from my domain, so it can't be a solution in this case. So my solution is no solution. And remember, on my lab it will say the empty set. All right, so I'm going to stop this video because we're about to the time limit, and I'll pick up this lesson on the next video.